My name's Frank Miller, I'm 72 years old, and for most of my life I thought I understood my body. I walked every morning. I stayed away from candy bars. I even stopped putting sugar in my coffee years ago. So when my doctor told me my blood sugar was still high, I just stared at the paper in disbelief. A1C's at 8.2 again, he said, glancing over his glasses. We might need to increase your medication. Increase? Again? I'd already been taking 2 pills a day, one in the morning, one at night, and yet somehow the numbers kept climbing like ivy on an old brick wall. That afternoon I sat in my car outside the clinic with the engine off. The paper with my results rested on my lap, trembling slightly in my hand. I could hear my own heartbeat louder than the traffic outside. I whispered to myself, "What am I doing wrong?" The truth was, I had no idea. I'd followed every instruction, every chart, every low-fat, low-sugar plan the doctor had ever printed for me. But nothing seemed to work. At home, my wife, Ellen, tried to stay positive. "It's just a number," she said softly. "You'll figure it out." But I saw the worry behind her smile. She'd watched me slow down over the years, the morning walks turning shorter, the naps longer. She'd watched me rub my eyes after dinner, struggling to focus on the TV. It wasn't just the numbers on the page that scared me. It was the fog in my head, the heaviness in my legs, the way my hands shook slightly whenever I skipped a meal. One evening, I dropped a glass of water in the kitchen. It shattered across the tiles, and for some reason that sound broke something inside me. I sat on the floor, staring at the pieces, and felt this strange mix of frustration and shame. I wasn't the man I used to be, and worse, I didn't understand why. In the weeks that followed, I tried to get serious. I cut out bread completely. No pasta, no rice. I even gave up my morning oatmeal, something I'd eaten since I was a boy. Still, the next test? 8.4, higher. "Maybe your body just doesn't respond anymore," the nurse said. "It happens with age." I nodded politely, but inside I was furious. Was that it? Just age? Was I supposed to accept that my own body was slipping away, one number at a time? That night, lying awake next to Ellen, I couldn't stop thinking about my father, how he'd lost his eyesight from diabetes in his late 70s, about my grandchildren, how I wanted to watch them grow up, not from a hospital bed, but standing, walking, laughing with them in the yard. I felt something deep inside, like a quiet voice whispering, "There has to be another reason, something the doctors weren't seeing, something simple maybe, but important." One morning I went for a walk earlier than usual. The air was cool and wet with dew, the kind of morning that reminds you you're alive. But halfway down the block, I felt that familiar wave of dizziness. I had to stop, leaning against a fence, pretending to tie my shoe while I waited for the feeling to pass. When I got home, Ellen was sitting by the window, reading. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I lied, but I wasn't. I felt trapped in a body that no longer listened. Later that day, as I checked my glucose monitor again, 167 after a salad, I realized something that chilled me. It wasn't just what I ate. Something deeper was off, something that no diet chart or prescription had ever explained. And that's when the frustration turned into obsession. I started reading everything, articles, studies, stories from other people my age. I filled notebooks with notes, circled words like insulin resistance and cellular energy, trying to make sense of what was happening. I didn't know it then, but that small spark of curiosity, the stubborn refusal to accept that's just aging, would change everything. That night, as I sat alone in the kitchen with a cup of herbal tea, I watched the streetlight flicker outside. Ellen had gone to bed hours ago. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of my own thoughts. And that's when I whispered something out loud for the first time. "There's something they're not telling us." I didn't mean it as a conspiracy. It was more of a feeling, an intuition. That maybe, just maybe, my high blood sugar wasn't simply about sugar at all. Something inside me was trying to wake up. and I was finally ready to listen. After that last doctor's appointment, my world got smaller. Not suddenly, but slowly, like the dimming of a light bulb. At first, it was just food. No bread, no pasta, no potatoes, no rice, no fruit, except a few slices of apple, if you must. I used to love Saturday breakfasts, pancakes, bacon, and coffee with Ellen while sunlight filled the kitchen. Now, I sat with scrambled eggs that tasted like cardboard, staring at her plate, pretending I didn't miss mine. "It's for your health," she'd remind me, and I'd smile back, though it didn't reach my eyes. Every meal became a calculation, grams of carbs, spikes, and crashes. I wasn't living anymore. I was managing. The strange thing about high blood sugar is that it steals quietly. It doesn't hurt the way a broken bone does. It just drains you. I used to walk 2 miles every morning before breakfast. By that winter, I could barely make it to the end of the block without stopping. My legs felt like sandbags, my breath short and shallow. At the grocery store, Ellen started doing most of the pushing. I'd lean on the cart handle, pretending I was just taking my time. Inside, I hated it. One evening, I forgot my grandson's birthday dinner. Completely forgot. Ellen found me sitting in the living room watching the same commercial loop for the 3rd time. "Frank," she said softly, "are you feeling all right?" I looked up, confused. "What do you mean?" "The kids are waiting for us. You said you'd make your chili." My stomach sank. I'd promised him. I always made chili for his birthday. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to Ellen's quiet breathing beside me. My chest felt heavy, not with pain but with shame. How could I forget something like that? The next morning, I tried to shake it off. I told myself it was just stress, just tiredness. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. It wasn't just my blood sugar that was out of balance, and it was my life. I stopped seeing my friends as often. I stopped playing cards on Thursdays, stopped volunteering at the community center. Every outing felt like a risk. Too far from my snacks, too tiring, too unpredictable. The world outside my house started to feel distant. Even my faith began to waver. I used to pray for strength every morning, but lately it felt like my prayers were bouncing off the ceiling. There were days I didn't even recognize myself. I'd catch my reflection in the hallway mirror, shoulders slumped, eyes dull, and think, "Who is that old man?" Then came the fatigue, the kind that doesn't lift, no matter how much you rest. I'd sit in my chair by the window, sunlight warm on my face, and still feel frozen inside. Ellen would bring me tea and smile, but I could see the worry behind her eyes. "Maybe you should ask the doctor about insulin," she'd say gently. "He says I'm not there yet," I'd reply. But I was already there, emotionally at least. I was tired of chasing numbers that never changed, tired of hearing the same advice repeated like a broken record. Eat less, move more, take your pills. If that's all it took, why was I still stuck? One afternoon, my daughter Amy stopped by. She's a nurse, practical and kind, the kind of woman who always has a plan. She sat across from me, watching as I struggled to open a jar of pickles. "Dad," she said quietly, "you've got to take this seriously." "You think I'm not?" I snapped, the anger surprising even me. Her eyes softened. "I just don't want to lose you too soon." The room went silent. The lid finally gave way, but I'd lost my appetite. After she left, I sat there a long time, staring at the empty chair across from me. I realized that wasn't anger I felt. It was fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of being a burden. Fear of disappearing. That night, Ellen and I had dinner in silence. Halfway through, she reached across the table and took my hand. "Frank," she said softly, "you've got to stop blaming yourself." "Then who should I blame?" I asked, my voice cracking. She didn't answer. She just squeezed my hand and said, "You're not alone in this." But I did feel alone, trapped in a body that wouldn't listen, in a life that kept shrinking. When I went to bed, I couldn't sleep. I lay there listening to the hum of the heater and the ticking of the clock. Every second felt like it was counting down to something I didn't want to face. It was like my own body had turned against me. That sentence kept echoing in my mind, and in that quiet, I finally admitted something I'd been avoiding for months. I wasn't afraid of dying. I was afraid of fading away, slowly, quietly, until no one noticed I was gone. That was the night everything began to change. Because sometimes it's only when you feel cornered, when every door seems closed, that you start to look for the one no one told you about. And I was about to find mine. It happened on a Sunday night. Funny how those moments come quietly. No thunder, no warning. Just a single night when the world feels heavier than usual. Ellen had gone to bed early. I stayed up to check my blood sugar before turning in. It read 212. 212. After a dinner of grilled chicken and steamed broccoli. I stared at the monitor, waiting for it to change, as if maybe it had made a mistake. It didn't. Something inside me broke then. Not loudly, just a soft, tired crack. "What's the point?" I whispered. For years, I'd followed every rule, every chart, every plan. I'd given up foods I loved, routines I enjoyed, little pieces of joy. And for what? The numbers didn't care. I turned off the light and sat there in the dark, the little red glow from the glucose meter still burning on the table like a quiet accusation. Around midnight, I went into the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. My face looked older than I remembered. My skin pale, my eyes sunken. I pressed my hands against the counter to steady myself. For a long time, I just stood there, watching the reflection of a man I barely recognized. That's when the dizziness hit, a sudden wave like the room had tilted on its side. My knees buckled and I grabbed the sink just in time to stop myself from falling. "Ellen," I called out weakly, but she didn't hear me. For a moment, I honestly thought, this might be it. My heart was pounding hard, my hands trembling. I slid down to the floor, sitting against the cold tiles, breathing in short, shallow bursts. I felt the weight of 72 years pressing down on me. All the good habits, all the effort, all the trying. And yet, here I was, scared and alone on the bathroom floor. After a few minutes, the feeling passed. I managed to stand, grab a towel, and splash cold water on my face. My reflection stared back, dripping and tired. "Is this the beginning of the end?" I whispered. That question hung in the air like smoke. I went back to bed quietly, not wanting to wake Ellen. She looked peaceful, her hand curled against the pillow. I lay beside her, staring into the darkness, listening to the quiet rhythm of her breathing. For the first time, I thought about what it would be like for her, without me. The bills, the house, the silence. I couldn't stop the tears that came. They weren't loud or dramatic, just slow, tired tears that ran down into the pillow. And somewhere between those tears and the ticking of the clock, I made a decision. I was done fighting a battle I couldn't win. If this was how it ended, with pills, tests, restrictions, and confusion, so be it. I would stop trying to fix what couldn't be fixed. The next few days passed in a blur. Ellen noticed I wasn't myself. "You didn't go for your walk this morning," she said one day. "Didn't feel like it," I replied. I didn't mention that my legs had started to ache again, or that my vision sometimes blurred when I stood too quickly. I just felt empty. I stopped checking my glucose numbers, stopped reading articles. Even food lost its taste. It was as if color had drained from the world. One evening, I sat in the living room, lights off, just staring out the window at the dark street. Across the road, I saw my neighbor, old Mr. Johnson, laughing with his grandson as they worked on a model airplane under the porch light. For a moment, I envied him so deeply it hurt, not for the health or the laughter, but for the connection. For that simple human feeling of still belonging to the world. That's what I missed the most. I didn't want to die. I just didn't want to live like this. Later that night, Ellen came into the room. She placed her hand on my shoulder gently. "Frank," she said softly, "you're scaring me." I didn't answer right away. Finally, I said, "I'm just tired, Ellen. Tired of fighting something I don't understand." She knelt beside me, eyes wet with tears. "You've always been the strongest man I know. But strength isn't about control. It's about hope." Hope. That word hit me like a whisper from somewhere far away. Something I'd forgotten even existed. But in that moment, I had none left. That night, as Ellen slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling again. The same quiet hum of the heater, the same ticking clock. Only this time, I didn't feel fear, just stillness. And yet, somewhere deep inside, beneath the exhaustion and the hopelessness, there was a flicker, faint but real. A part of me still believed there had to be something more. Something I hadn't tried, something no one had told me about. I didn't know it yet, but that small flicker, that whisper that refused to die, would lead me somewhere I never expected. Because just when I thought the story was over, life was about to turn the page. It was a Saturday morning in late spring, one of those days when the air smells of fresh grass and ripe tomatoes, and you can almost believe life might be simple again. Ellen had convinced me to go with her to the farmer's market downtown. "Just a walk," she said. "A little sunlight will do you good." I didn't want to go, but she was right about the sunlight. It had been weeks since I'd felt it on my face, so I went. The market was alive in a way I hadn't been for a long time. Laughter, chatter, the smell of coffee and baked bread drifting through the air. People carried baskets filled with bright greens and oranges, like they were collecting pieces of happiness. I wandered past a table of wild honey, then one selling homemade soap. My legs ached a little, but for once I didn't mind. That's when I heard a familiar voice. "Frank Miller? Is that you?" I turned and saw Clara, a woman I hadn't seen in years. She used to live down the street when our kids were young, always full of energy, always smiling. She looked older, of course, and we all did, but her eyes still had that spark. "Clara, wow, it's been what, 20 years? At least," she laughed. You look like you could use a good meal." I chuckled, rubbing my stomach. Blood sugar's been giving me trouble. Guess I'm on more of a watch what I eat plan these days. She tilted her head, studying me with that same knowing look she used to give the neighborhood kids when they lied about eating their vegetables. "Still dealing with that, huh? My husband went through the same thing," she said, "until he started taking something natural that changed everything for him." I sighed. "Clara, if I had a nickel for every time someone said that, I'd be rich." She smiled. "I'm not talking about magic pills or fancy diets, Frank. I mean something real. Something ancient, actually." I raised an eyebrow. "Ancient?" "Black cumin seed oil," she said simply. "They call it the seed of blessing in the Middle East. My husband swears by it. I'd never heard of it. And it helps with blood sugar?" "Not just sugar," she said. "It helps your body listen again. That's what his doctor said. Something about improving how the cells respond to insulin. Helps your body listen again." That phrase stuck with me. For months I'd been saying my body didn't listen anymore, that no matter what I did, it wouldn't respond. And here was this woman talking about exactly that, as if she'd overheard my private thoughts. Clara reached into her bag and pulled out a small dark bottle. "Here," she said, handing it to me. "Cold-pressed, organic, just a teaspoon a day. You don't have to believe me. Just try it for a week." I turned the bottle over in my hand. The label was simple, nothing flashy, nothing like the usual supplements that scream for attention. It just said, Nigella sativa oil. My husband's fasting numbers dropped from the 160s to the 110s, Clara added. And he didn't change his diet much. He just started taking this and walking every morning. I didn't know what to say. I'd grown skeptical of everything, of new ideas, of natural remedies, of hope itself. But something about Clara's calm confidence made it hard to dismiss. She wasn't trying to sell me anything. She was sharing, the way old friends do when they see someone hurting. "If it doesn't work, you'll be out $20, she said, smiling. "But if it does, maybe you'll get your mornings back." That night, back home, I placed the bottle on the kitchen counter and stared at it for a long time. Ellen noticed. "What's that?" she asked. "Something Clara told me about," I said. "Black cumin seed oil. Does it help?" "She says it helped her husband." Ellen looked at me for a moment, then nodded. "Well, maybe it's worth a try." I poured a teaspoon into a small glass. The smell was earthy, peppery, almost like something wild. I hesitated, then took it in one gulp. It wasn't pleasant, bitter, thick, but there was something oddly grounding about it, like I'd just swallowed a piece of the earth itself. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in months. No tossing, no racing thoughts, just rest. The next morning, when I woke, something felt different, not miraculous, just lighter. I didn't rush to check my glucose monitor. I just sat by the window, coffee in hand, watching the sun rise. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like my body was my enemy. It was quiet inside me, calm, steady. Ellen came into the kitchen, still in her robe. "You're up early," she said. "Yeah," I smiled softly. "Just felt like watching the sunrise." She smiled back. "It's been a while since I've seen you do that." I didn't tell her why. Not yet. Because deep down, I wasn't sure what was happening. But I knew one thing. That small bottle, that chance encounter, had awakened something I thought I'd lost forever. Hope. The first morning I took the oil, I didn't expect anything. I'd stopped expecting things to change a long time ago. But by the third day, something strange happened. I woke up before my alarm. That might sound small, but for months I'd been sleeping through half the morning, groggy and drained before the day even began. This time I opened my eyes before the sun had fully risen, the sky still a pale gray, the world quiet and soft. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel tired. I sat at the edge of the bed, waiting for the usual wave of dizziness that came every morning. It didn't come. When I walked into the kitchen, Ellen looked surprised. "You're up early," she said. "Yeah," I smiled. "Didn't need the alarm." "That's a first," she teased gently. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat by the window. The birds were louder that morning. Or maybe I was just noticing them again. I didn't mention the oil. I wasn't ready to call it anything yet. Not a solution, not a miracle. Just something that made me curious again. That night I took another spoonful. Thick, bitter, grounding. It was almost ritualistic. By the end of the first week, Ellen said something that stopped me mid-bite. "You look different," she said. "Different how?" "I don't know. Brighter, maybe. Like you've been sleeping better." She was right. I had been sleeping better. Not the restless, half-aware kind of sleep I'd gotten used to, but deep, steady rest that made me feel alive when I woke. I'd even started walking again, not far, just down the street and back. But the ache in my legs wasn't as sharp, the heaviness not as crushing. Each step felt like a small victory. One afternoon, while pruning the small lemon tree in our backyard, I realized something I hadn't noticed in months. I was humming. It startled me. That quiet, absent-minded hum, something I hadn't done since before the fatigue took over. Ellen came outside, smiling. "You're in a good mood," she said. "Guess I am." "That oil thing working?" I hesitated. "I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just starting to feel like myself again." 2 weeks in, I decided to check my numbers again. I hadn't touched the glucose monitor since that night I almost gave up. My hands trembled a little as I pricked my finger and waited for the reading. The number blinked onto the screen. 143. I blinked back. Then again. It wasn't perfect, but it was the lowest it had been in months. A wave of warmth spread through me. Not relief exactly, but possibility. "Ellen," I called, holding up the meter. "What is it?" she asked. 143. She smiled, her eyes bright. "That's amazing." I shrugged, trying to play it cool, but inside I was grinning like a kid. Something was changing, not just the numbers, but me. The next few days I noticed more subtle shifts. My afternoon crashes weren't as brutal. My hands didn't shake when I skipped a snack. Even my mind felt sharper, like someone had cleaned the fog off the windows of my brain. I started cooking again. Simple meals, vegetables, salmon, a little olive oil, herbs from Ellen's garden. I even caught myself dancing a little while waiting for the pan to heat up. When Amy came by one evening, she looked at me like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. "Dad," she said slowly, "you look good." "Thanks?" I laughed. "No, I mean it. Last month you looked ready to collapse. What changed?" "Just trying something new," I said, not wanting to jinx it. "Well," she smiled, "whatever it is, keep doing it." Each morning, I took my teaspoon of oil, and each night I found myself whispering a quiet thank you, not to anyone in particular, just to life itself. It wasn't about a miracle. It was about balance, about something inside me finally remembering how to work again. I began to read more about what Clara had said. Turns out, black cumin seed oil had been used for thousands of years. In Egypt, in India, even mentioned by Hippocrates himself. Some called it the seed of blessing. The more I read, the more sense it made. Maybe it wasn't about lowering sugar directly. Maybe it was about teaching the body to listen again, to remember how to respond. That phrase stayed with me. Teaching the body to listen again. By the end of the third week, my mornings had become a quiet joy. I'd wake, open the curtains, breathe in the cool air, and take that single spoonful. The bitterness didn't bother me anymore. It felt natural, like a small reminder that healing isn't always sweet. Sometimes it's earthy, raw, and real. One morning, Ellen joined me at the table. She reached across and took my hand. "You seem happier," she said softly. "I think I am." "You know," she smiled. "I miss that smile." I looked at her, the sunlight catching the lines around her eyes, the same eyes that had watched me at my weakest, that never stopped believing I could come back. And in that moment, I realized it wasn't just my body that was waking up. It was me. I didn't start with the science. I started with a feeling that my body, after months of stubborn silence, was finally listening again. Still, I wanted to understand why. If my numbers were inching down and my mornings felt lighter, there had to be a reason deeper than luck. So I read. Not the dense stuff, just enough to make sense of what my own body was trying to tell me. Here's what I learned, in plain English. First, high blood sugar wasn't just about sugar floating around like confetti. It was about insulin resistance. My muscles, liver, and fat cells not hearing insulin's knock at the door. Insulin is the key. My cells were the lock. And for years, that lock was rusty. When cells don't respond, the pancreas pumps out more insulin to force the door open, and over time that system frays. That's why my numbers climbed even when I was doing everything right. The problem wasn't only what I ate, it was how my cells were responding. Second, the little black bottle on my counter, black cumin seed oil, Nigella sativa, wasn't some new fad. People have used the seed for centuries. Modern studies, I discovered, are catching up, suggesting it might nudge blood sugar in the right direction for some folks. A few clinical trials and meta-analyses report modest improvements in fasting glucose, or A1C. Not a cure, not magic. Just a gentle push that can matter when you stack it with better sleep, movement, and eating patterns. The compound people talk about is thymoquinone, a mouthful that seems to carry antioxidant and anti-inflammatory effects. Again, not a silver bullet, but a tool. I also noticed something simple. Since I'd started the oil, I'd been sleeping. Real sleep. And sleep isn't just rest, it's metabolism's best friend. Poor sleep can make cells more insulin resistant. Better sleep can help them listen again. Even my morning routine, waking earlier, walking, eating at the same time, was quietly working with my biology instead of against it. Scientists call it circadian rhythm. Our clocks prefer food and activity in daylight, not late at night. Eat earlier, move more in the day, sleep in the dark. You give insulin a fair shot at doing its job. Then there was movement. When I picked up my short walks again, I didn't realize I was performing a small miracle at the muscle level. Muscles are like sponges for glucose. When you use them, they soak up sugar from the blood, with or without much insulin. The more consistently I moved, 150 minutes a week was the number I kept seeing, the more responsive my body became. It wasn't about running marathons, it was about a steady rhythm my cells could count on. Food still mattered, but in a way that felt less like punishment and more like partnership. Protein and fiber at breakfast made the rest of the day calmer. An earlier dinner kept my nights quiet and my mornings steadier. The trick wasn't zero joy, it was timing and balance, steady meals, earlier eating windows, and plates that slowed the rise of sugar instead of slamming it. That framing, timing, and balance made me feel free again. Back to the black seed. I kept asking, what exactly is it doing? The best I could gather is this. In some studies, black seed or its oil improved fasting glucose and A1C a bit, and sometimes lowered markers of inflammation and oxidative stress, both of which can worsen insulin resistance. Researchers still argue about dosage and duration, and results vary. That made sense to me because people vary. My takeaway was humble. If a daily teaspoon helped my body listen, even a little, it was worth its seat at the table, as long as it sat next to sleep, walking, and wiser meals. I didn't stop my medications without talking to my doctor, and I won't tell you to either. What I did do was bring him what I'd found. I told him about my mornings, my numbers, the oil, and the new routine. He nodded more than I expected. He reminded me there's strong evidence that lifestyle, movement, weight management, stress, and sleep can prevent diabetes or slow it down, sometimes even push prediabetes back the other way. For the first time in years, our conversation felt like a partnership. If I had to explain my turnaround in a single sentence, it would be this. I stopped fighting sugar and started helping my cells. The oil might have been the nudge. The rhythm, earlier meals, regular walks, real sleep, was the music. Together, they taught my body to hear insulin's knock again. I kept a small notebook where I wrote 2 things every night: the time I ate dinner and how far I walked. Dinner 6:15 p.m., walk to the oak tree and back. It sounds trivial, but those pages became proof. Not just numbers, but a new narrative. On the mornings when the meter blinked a better number, I'd trace my finger backward. Earlier dinner, decent sleep, a short evening stroll, 1 teaspoon of oil. There it was, a pattern, patient and unglamorous. And when the numbers didn't budge, because some days they don't, I didn't spiral. I ate breakfast with fiber and protein. I walked anyway. I slept on purpose. Healing, I learned, is less like a lightning bolt and more like tide water. Slow, steady, faithful. If your story sounds like mine, here's what I wish someone had told me at the start. You're not broken. Your cells are just hard of hearing. Give them clearer signals. Daylight food, gentle movement, real rest, and consider a natural nudge with your clinician's guidance. Sometimes the answer isn't louder medicine, it's better listening. And that's how I went from chasing numbers to building a life my body could recognize, one quiet, ordinary day at a time. It's strange how change sneaks up on you. One day you're forcing yourself to move, and the next your body asks for it, like an old song it remembers by heart. By the time summer arrived, I had something I hadn't felt in years: rhythm. Not the rigid kind you check off a list, but a quiet, steady beat that my days began to follow almost on their own. I'd wake before the sun, no alarm needed anymore. The sky would be painted with that soft blue light that only lasts a few minutes, and I'd take it in, breathing slowly before the world woke up. The first thing I did was simple. A glass of warm water with lemon, then my teaspoon of black cumin seed oil. I'd learned to let it sit on my tongue a moment before swallowing. Earthy, bitter, grounding. A reminder that healing isn't always sweet. Then I'd lace up my shoes and go outside. My walk wasn't long, maybe 20 minutes around the neighborhood, but it was enough. Enough to feel my heart steady, my breath even, my body alive. Sometimes I'd pass my neighbor's house and wave. Sometimes I'd stop and watch the sparrows fighting over the same branch of the oak tree. Small things, I told myself, Duri, but they make all the difference. Breakfast had changed too. No more cereal boxes or toast. Now it was Greek yogurt with a handful of blueberries, a drizzle of olive oil, and a sprinkle of cinnamon. Funny thing, I'd read that cinnamon could help stabilize blood sugar, but even if it didn't, it made everything smell like Sunday mornings used to. Ellen joined me most days. "You're really sticking with this," she said once, smiling as she stirred her tea. "I guess I finally stopped treating it like punishment," I said. "It's more like partnership." She laughed softly. "Partnership with what?" "With my body," I said. "With time." And I meant it. For years I'd treated my health like a war, against sugar, against age, against myself. But now it felt more like peace. Afternoons were for work in the garden. Ellen had planted tomatoes, rosemary, and mint. The smell of the earth, the hum of the bees. It grounded me more than any medication ever had. There's something deeply healing about dirt under your nails. Maybe it's the connection, to life, to growth, to patience. When I got tired, I didn't push. I'd rest in the shade with a glass of water, watch the sunlight filter through the leaves, and think about how far I'd come. My meals followed a simple rule now. Real food, early meals. Lunch was usually a mix of colors, greens, lentils, grilled chicken or salmon. Dinner came early, always before sunset. At first, Ellen found that strange. "Dinner at 5?" she laughed. "Turns out my body likes daylight," I said, and she couldn't argue with the results. My numbers stayed steady. My energy lasted through the day. And for the first time in years, I didn't crave the quiet numbness of afternoon naps. In the evenings, we walked together. Slow, peaceful walks, just talking about nothing. The neighbor's dog, the weather, what to make for Sunday dinner. Sometimes we didn't talk at all. Just held hands, our steps falling into rhythm like they used to when we were younger. Those walks became sacred, the punctuation mark at the end of every day. By September, I'd lost a few pounds without trying. My doctor smiled when he saw my chart. "Whatever you're doing," he said, "keep it up." "I'm just listening," I replied. He raised an eyebrow. "Listening." "To my body," I said. "To nature, to time." He laughed, but not dismissively. More like a man who wished more of his patients said the same. I started sharing what I'd learned, not as advice, just as a story. At the community center, after church, even in line at the pharmacy. People my age would nod and say, "Yeah, I feel that too." The fatigue, the fog, the frustration. And I'd tell them, don't chase perfection. Just start with one small thing you can do every day. Because that's what saved me. The small things. The teaspoon of oil. The morning walk. The earlier dinner. The steady rhythm. One morning, Ellen came into the kitchen and said something that nearly made me cry. "You know," she said, "it feels like I have my husband back." I smiled, my throat tight. Guess he just needed a little time to find himself again. We stood there a while, sunlight spilling across the counter, the smell of mint and coffee filling the air. In that moment, I realized the truth of it all. That healing wasn't about going back to who I was, but about becoming someone gentler, wiser, more awake. And I wouldn't trade that for anything. Now, each day feels less like survival and more like a conversation between me and my body, me and the world. The rhythm is simple. Wake early, move gently, eat real, rest deeply, and listen. Always listen. Because sometimes the most powerful medicine isn't found in a prescription bottle. It's found in consistency, compassion, and the courage to begin again. It's been 6 months now. 6 quiet, ordinary, miraculous months since that morning at the farmer's market. The morning that changed everything without meaning to. And when I look back, I barely recognize the man I was before. The one who sat in the dark counting numbers on a glucose meter. The one who thought healing meant control or perfection or fighting his own body into submission. That man was tired. This one, me, feels alive. These days I wake before the sun, not because I have to, but because I want to. The morning air feels like forgiveness. I walk down the same streets that once felt endless, and now they feel like home. Sometimes my neighbor waves from his porch. Sometimes a kid rides by on his bike and nods, the way kids do when they see someone familiar. And I think, I'm still here, not surviving, living. The numbers on my meter still fluctuate because life does, but I don't chase them anymore. I understand now that health isn't a straight line. It's a rhythm, a dialogue, a dance between discipline and grace. And I finally stopped treating my body like a problem to be solved. It's my oldest friend. It carried me through 72 years of living. Laughter, work, mistakes, love, loss. And it's still trying to take care of me. All I had to do was start listening again. A few weeks ago, Ellen and I took our first trip in years. Nothing fancy, just a weekend by the coast. We walked along the beach, hand in hand, our shoes sinking into the cool sand. The waves rolled in slow and steady like a heartbeat. "You seem lighter," she said. "Maybe I am," I replied. "You're not afraid anymore, are you?" I stopped walking, looked at the horizon, and felt the truth of her words settle deep in my chest. "No," I said quietly, "I'm not." Because I had been afraid for so long, of the numbers, of the future, of aging itself. But fear had kept me small, and the moment I stopped being afraid, I started to heal. That night we sat on the porch of the small cottage, watching the sun melt into the ocean. The sky turned gold, then pink, then violet, the kind of beauty that makes you forget to speak. Ellen reached for my hand. "You know," she said softly, "you've changed more than your habits."
"How so?" "You're kinder to yourself." I smiled. Guess I finally figured out I deserve my own patience. When we got home, I started keeping a new kind of journal. Not just numbers and meals, but moments. Things that reminded me I was still growing. June 5th, walked past the park without stopping to rest. June 12th, laughed so hard at dinner I nearly cried. June 19th, held my grandson on my shoulders again. Small victories, ordinary miracles.
One Sunday at church, the pastor talked about the difference between getting older and growing older. He said, "Getting older happens to your body. Growing older happens to your spirit." And I realized I'd spent years getting older without growing. It took one dark night on a bathroom floor, a bottle of black seed oil, and a little faith to remember that growth never stops. Not at 72, not ever. So if you're listening to this and you see yourself somewhere in my story, if you're tired, frustrated, scared of what the next blood test will show, I want to tell you something from the heart. You are not too old to heal. You are not too late to change. And you are not broken. Your body remembers. Your cells remember. They just need time, love, and a reason to listen again. Maybe for you, it won't be black cumin seed oil. Maybe it'll be walking more, sleeping better, drinking water, or simply forgiving yourself for the days you couldn't do any of it. Healing isn't a miracle. It's a partnership. It's choosing to show up for yourself again and again, even when it's hard. And every time you do, something inside you whispers back, "Thank you." These days, I still take my oil each morning. I still walk, still eat early, still sit by the window with my coffee and watch the sunrise. It's become less of a routine and more of a prayer, not asking for anything, just saying thank you. Thank you for another day. Thank you for another chance. Thank you for the peace that comes from finally making friends with time. Because at 72, I've learned something no doctor ever wrote on a chart. Getting older isn't the same as growing weaker. It's an invitation to slow down, to listen, to rediscover what truly matters. And as for me, I'm not afraid anymore. Don't give up on yourself, I'd tell anyone who asks. You're still here, no, and that means your story isn't over. So if my story has touched you, if you've ever felt trapped by your body or betrayed by time, tell me your story too. Have you found something that helped you heal? Something simple, natural, and real? Share it, because your story might just be the light someone else is waiting for.